Welcome to Money on Your Mind. My name is Belinda Fuchs. I'm the host of Money on Your Mind and the president, founder, and chief money motivator of OwnYourMoney.com. At OwnYourMoney.com, we help people through their emotional blocks around money to then make more, save more, and stress less about their money. I think of myself like a cross between a financial therapist and a business coach. We understand that money is on your mind nowadays, and today's topic is so relevant because really we're now feeling the effect that money has on our relationships and the relationship that we have to money. So today's topic, money and relationships. Welcome, thank you for joining us. And I am fortunate to have two guests here with me today. I will introduce them to you. First, we have Gail Hardenberg, who is a clinical social worker who has a private practice in Sudbury. For many years, she has worked with couples to enhance, revive, or even save their marriages. The issue of money and meshing different attitudes and approaches is often on the forefront of her clients' concerns. She has learned there are predictable issues that recur when couples are trying to deal with their most difficult issues, and money is certainly one of them. Gail has been happily married for 25 years and has two children in their early 20s. She practices what she preaches, and she has had many discussions with her husband about money during that time. Also with us today is Janet Gaffey. Janet is a wife, mother, and an interior designer. She's the principal designer of Santini and Company. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
On our very salient topic of money and relationships. And what I find is that, there are really two aspects I touched on that we're going to talk about on today's show. The first half will be our relationship to money. The second half will be money's effect on our relationships. So if we start by thinking about our relationship to money, what I find is that it's almost like we're fish swimming in water and we're pretending that we're not. It's like people often try and forget that they have a relationship to money, or they just really push it down. They don't really recognize it. And it often has very serious ramifications on their lives. So to start, if we think about, well, what does money mean to you? Maybe you can start to share that with us, Janet. And then Gail, if you can share kind of what you see when you work with clients as a couples counselor, as a therapist, in terms of the effect and how people think about money.
For me, I guess money is the backdrop for everything. And I think a lot of it comes from your background, just how you grew up and the value of what money allowed you to do, or sort of a ticket here and a ticket there. And I made a lot of choices about money, but what money means to me is different now because the world is so different, and not just the economy, but just how we don't really see our money. We use credit cards. Everything's very more remote. So we just imagine we have money or don't, but it's more obscure for me now than it was, and I think it's easier to get kind of lost in as to where I am with it, and I work in a business where I, of course, try to make a living, and sometimes I work, and I don't make a living. And another contrast is that my husband came from a very different set of beliefs. His was security. It wasn't having money, making more money, getting ahead, doing that. It was really more just having enough, a roof over your head. And that's kind of, I think, sums up my thoughts on money.
That's very helpful, and what you touched on is so relevant because when we think about what money means to us, and I ask that question to classes that I teach and people that I coach, and it's so interesting how it can mean anything from security, independence, freedom, flexibility, to control, happiness, joy, and it's just so loaded. It's not merely just pieces of paper and a currency that we use. What can you add, Gail?
Well, I think the list of things that you just described can be all under the heading of how we handle our vulnerability. How do we handle our vulnerability? And that's really where we see this in couples. Because most of us try to be responsible for ourselves in some way, but if things go wrong, many of us blame ourselves, sometimes excessively. Many of us blame others, sometimes excessively. And of course, in a couple, who's the most convenient person to blame is your partner. So it really sometimes comes down to a difficult discussion about who's to blame for what's going on, because this is such a personal, primal issue.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because you touch on the who's to blame, and I think we've almost trained ourselves to look outside of ourselves in terms of taking responsibility for our money. And so, you know, at ownyourmoney.com, right, I literally created the company because I want to teach people how to own their money. And what I find is that most people don't. You know, either they let their debt and their credit cards, their banks own them, but then there's also this very emotional component to it where they don't actually take responsibility for it. You know, and really, you know, I think we make taking responsibility as fun, sexy, and cool as irresponsibility has always been. You know, and right now it's so relevant when we hear about the era of responsibility that's coming on. But I think in a lot of ways people don't want to be responsible, right? They don't want to take accountability for what's happening right now, and they're so used to feeling helpless or blaming or sitting in a lot of judgment and shame about money. I find that a lot too. So the alternative is certainly gaining some awareness, some perspective to it. I think about our belief systems as our BS, because it's the script that we've created for ourselves. A script because it's not really true, but it's how we're living out our lives. And we've created this from, you know, what we've taught ourselves, our parents. You know, you touched on your husband's role there. And I think, you know, that's certainly a piece of it, and then our environment has a lot to do with it. And so what happens is that there's just so much playing in any given moment, and it kind of stops us a lot of times. And this is where our subconscious beliefs, our BS, come into play. So, Gail, can you touch on how you see people's belief systems play out?
Sure.
You know, about money in particular?
Sure. I think some of it has to do when you're in a couple, people naturally fall into roles. And the question of how rigidly one stays within role it depends on the couple. And then there's the question of how much that can be discussed. How safe is it to discuss that versus you just better do it. And so the issue of who's supposed to earn the money, who's supposed to earn more money, who's supposed to take care of the money, there's a big list of who's supposed to do what. And then again, it's the issue of whether or not it's safe to talk about it, because in some marriages and some couples, people really haven't learned how to do that well or safely, and then it's just a lot of escalating arguments. And that's where things get very sticky, where people really need help in learning how to speak basically to each other so that they can talk about these very difficult issues.
Completely agree. And our next guests are going to be a couple, and we're going to have a chance to talk about how they see that play out. And you touched on it too. What can you share with us, Jana, in terms of your relationship to money and how you've seen it affect you at home, at work? What's changed over time?
Well, it definitely has changed. One of the key in our relationship around money was a revelation probably 15 years ago when we were having issues around money, and we went to a therapist and talking about it, you know, and I would wish that more money was coming from his side than my side, and it came up in this session that my wish to have money, spend money, and so on just wasn't shared by him. So that since then, that's probably why I started my own business and have just galloped along, and realizing that it's my perception, desires, needs, wants are very different than his, and it's not fair to lay them on him. So that I've learned about money, and I also have learned that it's very hard to make a lot of it, at least in this economy. So you have to just set your sights down. And it's affected us too, because we've thought of selling our house. So we put the house on the market thinking it would sell, and it didn't sell, so we've had to negotiate all of that and decide what to do about that. It's endless, I think, the importance of money in a relationship.